Southwest Fire Academy was established in 2015 as a response to the recognized need for quality, safe, and affordable fire and rescue training in Ontario. This is not your average fire college. SFA has high standards for their students, and it is their mission to teach and produce qualified, ambitious firefighters who are prepared to work hard to serve their communities. This is not a diploma mill. This is where you can learn strategic, aggressive firefighting from passionate, intelligent instructors who never forget why they were made to do this job. SFA is an accredited private career college that is regulated by the Ministry of Training, colleges, and universities, with a memorandum of understanding with the Office of the Fire Marshal. This means that SFA is an approved training provider with the OFM, and the programs are recognized in Ontario. Check out their pre-service and expanding selection of course offerings at southwestfireacademy.ca. Hello everyone. Welcome to episode 106 of Multiple Calls. I'm Scott Hewlett. By permitting, or better yet, encouraging conversation between colleagues, crews, or departments, as unpolished and fragmented the thoughts and delivery may be, we open up the possibility for understanding and progress. When thoughts and ideas are verbalized and pass through the filter of external knowledge and perspectives, change occurs. Whether that change is practical and tangible, or subjective and non-quantifiable. Our work and our environment are not the same. They are better for it, even when the result is discomfort and uncertainty. Here's my chat with Nick Ledin. Hey man.
How you doing, brother?
Good, we're both rocking the glasses today.
Yeah, bald is beautiful too, man.
Love it. Thanks for making the time today.
Yeah, man. We had a beautiful morning. We got a bunch of stuff accomplished. Nothing important. Just taking down the Christmas trees and dropping a kid off at a birthday party and dropping some stuff off for donations.
Just chaos.
Absolutely, man. So you were night boarding?
Yeah. Most of the resorts open all night, so.
Yeah, good for you, man.
Yeah. The light's always better at night.
That's fair. It's one thing I miss about living where I live now. Like, we got little hills and stuff, but I feel pretty spoiled, and I'm kind of a snob a little bit around here now. We try to go a couple times a year, a handful of times a year with my little ones, but yeah, it's not the same as living in Colorado.
Yeah. It's like people that move out west in Canada and then come back to Ontario. They just pretty much give up skiing and snowboarding. It's never the same.
Right?
We take what we can get.
Yeah, fair enough, man. I love skiing, and I've never been snowboarding. I really want to.
It's great. Yeah, I feel a lot more natural on the board than I do on skis, so. I did both for about a year, and then every time I was on my skis, I wanted to be back on the board, so I just abandoned it altogether. Yeah, you've done some great episodes as of late, like you did Undisclosed Agents, Make Do. You guys did a crossover with the FireNuggets podcast that you put on, and the Weekly Scrap, you've obviously covered that too, so you've covered a lot of ground.
Really well. No doubt, man. What do you want to talk about today?
Yeah, well, we can hopefully fill in a few gaps with, you growing up.
Perfect.
And then we can dive into some topics, but we don't need to cover the same stuff you've done before. So,
okay, that sounds fair, man.
Yeah.
If you got any rough ideas that I might need to go pull up some notes or something like that, just let me know.
I will. Best thing is we can edit. It's all edited, so if you want to pause and look something up, you can, and we can just dive back in. And then when we edit, it's all smoothed out.
Oh, perfect.
So
I appreciate it about your show. Your show is always so fucking smooth, and I'm super jealous of that, especially when I'm so clunky at times. A lot of respect for what you do, man.
Thanks. It just takes a lot longer to do it. Like, that's why we can only do a couple a month, because it's laborious. I should let you know that you can use ubiquitous as much as you want on this podcast. I'm all about the words. So.
I'm sure I brought that up in one of the podcasts.
Yeah, take that, Jeff.
JB, yeah. Now he knows what it means. It's funny how our show kind of started. We were oftentimes both on the air, but oftentimes a lot of the questions came from me, depending on who the guest was. But oftentimes that was kind of my role initially, was come up with a bunch of questions. And a lot of my questions are these long-winded. I smuggle a couple questions in one and just kind of hard to read. and not very conducive to how JB kind of operates as well. So sometimes I'd have this, like, what I thought was just a beautiful question written up for somebody, did my research on them, all this stuff. And it doesn't quite flow well during the show. So we've tried to adjust course since then.
Well, I'll flip it on you because I literally sat down and wrote one for you today, and then I'm writing in. I'm like, this is a really long-winded lead-in to just like a simple question. So
yeah, I do that all the time.
We'll do it. It's all good. I get it. I appreciate it sometimes. I like the setup. I like context. I like that. I like the lead-in.
One of the greatest parts about doing this is we get to sit down with people that we admire almost exclusively. I very rarely am interviewing somebody that I don't want to talk to. Maybe that's never even happened. I don't even know. But I'm like, well, I got to do them justice. I should do more research and I should be better at this. But I want to make sure that we're asking real legitimate questions at times too.
And there are some basic questions that have been asked all the time on podcasts, right? So it's nice to dig into the meat of it a little bit with long form.
I agree.
Yeah, let's start off with where you grew up and tell me a bit about your family. We'll get into school and sort of go from there. We'll fill in some gaps and then we'll segue from there.
So I grew up in a suburb of Minneapolis, probably 20, 30 minutes away from downtown Minneapolis, a little suburb called Eden Prairie. I spent the first 18 years of my life there and grew up in a house with my mom and my dad. They've been married now for 56 years, so congrats to them. And then I had two brothers as well. Scott is my oldest brother. He was 12 years older than me as far as like grades go. So when I was in first grade, he was already in college. So he was there, but he was kind of, from my earliest memories, he was always kind of visiting for the weekend. And then I had a middle brother named Brett, who was 7 years older than me at school. So when I was in fifth grade or something, he was finishing up high school. So I remember a lot of the dynamics between Brett and I, and Scott and I a little bit less so. But parents have been happily married. They're great people. Two of the hardest workers that I've ever met. My mom did in-home daycare, so there was always just a zoo at our house. I don't know how many kids that she had at any given time, but there was 3 or 4 infants and a handful of school-age kids as well. So there was always like 10 kids. So I was never at a shortage of friends. They were kind of trapped. They couldn't go anywhere else. So they kind of had to be, whether they liked to or not, kind of had to be my friends. She did that in our house for why we lived in Eden Prairie for 18 years. And even before that, she did that in the city that they spent some time in, that I was born in, Great Falls, Minnesota. But I think she did 20 some years in-home daycare and never once took a sick day. So every year she would take off like a week, I think it was, for a vacation or something like that. But other than that, 5 days a week, 51 weeks a year, she was working and never had a sick day. And she also has lupus, which is an autoimmune disorder. And so at times she would be a little bit more run down than maybe most of us, but still powered on through it.
Daycare is where all the germs are too. That's crazy.
Right? There was always kids with runny noses and coughing and snotting all over the place. So mom, incredibly hard worker. And I got to see her work, every single day when I came home. And she was working when I was at school, obviously. But I got to see her and her work ethic every single day, which I think kind of been imprinted on me. And then my dad is somebody who loved his job. He did an office job. He was a materials manager and a parts purchaser for a couple of organizations, but loved it and would spend his free time on the weekends doing that at times. And just retired about 2.5 years ago now. So worked all the way up until he was like 72 or 73. Wow. And so he put in 20 years at one company. They kind of downsized. He went to another company, put another 20 years in there. So it kind of had to be pried away. Wanted to retire, but also didn't want to retire because he liked what he did, which is kind of nice. You enjoy what you do, you never work a day in your life, right?
Sometimes it's probably weird for firefighters to hear that other people love their jobs too.
Right? It's nice to see that. My mom was incredibly hardworking and enjoyed a lot of the times, but didn't love her job. My dad loved it. On the weekends, that's what he wanted to do at times. We're Vikings fans in my family, so we'd be watching the Vikings game and he's got a computer open and he's purchasing or looking at prices or whatever else he's got to do for his job and just enjoyed it.
How was school for you?
School was fun. I was super lucky growing up. I had a bunch of really good friends. A lot of my high school friends were still super tight with 10, 12, 14 of us that every year get together for the better part of a week for the first 20-ish years after high school. Aging myself now, we'd go camping up in the Boundary Waters or some other kind of remote part of Minnesota. And now we kind of rent VRBOs and we all get together and we make fun of each other and laugh with each other until it hurts. I always did relatively well in school. I liked going to school for the most part and was relatively active in sports as well. So growing up, we did a little bit of everything. We played baseball was kind of my first love, but a lot of tennis because my brother played tennis. My oldest brother, Scott, he was a pretty good tennis player. I was not nearly as good. but I always enjoyed sports. A little bit of football, a little bit of hockey. I can't grow up in Minnesota without playing some hockey. Cross country. I'm sure I'm forgetting a sport or two in there, and a bunch of wrestling. That was kind of my main sport growing up, and did that throughout high school, and debated going and doing that in college, but kind of last minute decided not to.
Any guides or mentors outside of your folks?
Yeah, so obviously mom and dad, number one and number two, and my brothers, both incredible athletes at wrestling primarily, but in general, my oldest brother, Scotty, he's like 5'4". If you know me, I'm like 5'8"-ish when I wake up, if I'm lucky. But Scotty always jokes, and there's probably some truth to this. I hope he never listens to this, but he's like, if I was 6 feet, no one would know me. I'd be a pro athlete at this point in time. Now he is 56, 7 years old at this point, so he would not be a pro athlete today, but incredible at what he does, whether it's golf or hockey or basketball or softball or baseball or wrestling or tennis. I mean, he's so gifted athletically. So always had those two as mentors in sports. And then in the same vein, a lot of wrestling coaches that I had. So first and foremost, Bill Germain, he was the high school wrestling coach from 8th grade through 11th grade. He retired from wrestling coaching going into our senior year. And we had a pretty decent team. And that's kind of why he retired. He thought the school could get a better coach, knowing that we had a couple decent wrestlers and a pretty solid team from top to bottom, really. And then I was lucky enough to wrestle with Team Minnesota for a while. Coach Ed Kane, who was super instrumental in my life. Dan Chandler, who, if you know anything about wrestling, is maybe one of the greatest coaches of all time. He's not as well known as Bill Sanderson or Dan Gable, but he was a 3-time Olympic team member as an athlete, 76, 80, and 84. So one of those, the U.S. boycotted the Russian Olympics. And then he was an 8-time Olympic team member as a coach. So 11 Olympics in a row, he was a Team USA member. So every summer for 2 weeks, he was our coach. There was, 20 or 30 of us in the wrestling room, and he was the one who led every single practice. And so we're learning from one of the greatest of all time. I was super fortunate enough. I help out with the FireNuggets podcast as well. And pretty early on, I got a chance to interview him. So that's one of the highlights of podcasting for me, was reaching out to this legend in sport and just getting a chance to rap with him for 45 minutes to an hour. So super thankful that he said yes to that ask. So most of my mentors up until I got into the fire service were sports related or family, and then some teachers as well. I had a couple teachers that left a pretty big impression on me as well.
What about jobs before the fire service?
Dude, I was all over the place. I'm sure I'm going to forget some jobs here. And I think I got my first job as soon as I was able to start driving. So probably 16. I mean, technically, I was on the books at the daycare. Diane's Daycare was the name of it. So technically, I was on the books as soon as legally I could, and I'd help her out whenever I could. But first kind of real job away from home was at an apple orchard, and then I worked at a drugstore, and then I worked as a janitor at the schools, even though I was trying to get on the grounds crew. Then the following summer, I worked at the grounds crew, and summer jobs were kind of all over the place in college. I worked for a seed company in Iowa, so I went to school at Iowa State University, and that's in Ames farmland. There's a joke that we always had in college is that Iowa's got 2 million people and 30 million hogs. And I think those numbers were pretty close to accurate back then. So farms everywhere, but I worked at a seed company for a summer. Maybe the worst job, worse than being a janitor, I thought. I worked at a golf course, part of the grounds crew out there. God, I worked in kitchens. I worked at a school as a paraprofessional, so with the developmentally delayed kids. I did a bunch of volunteering throughout college as well, because I kind of had some other aspirations in college. And then I worked for a clinical research company that did research for pharmaceutical companies while I was going to paramedic school. I know I forgot a couple jobs in there, but I was all over the place. Nothing really sang to me, nothing really stuck. But I learned a lot about kind of what I didn't want to do and what I was looking for in a job.
Was the entomology lab, was that the pharmaceutical one?
So no, that was a different one. So that's what I did kind of when I was wrapping up. So I graduated in December of 2002, but my lease kept me there for another like 7 or 8 months. And even prior to this, I was working in a lab. So I worked in an entomology lab at the university as well. I also did some work for like Ticketmaster and a whole bunch of kind of odd jobs in college as well. Anything I could do to make $20 here and there legally.
And you kind of covered in the Undisclosed Agents episode about your exposure to the fire service. You sort of came at it through the medic avenue.
Yeah. Medicine was kind of my goal in undergrad. When I graduated high school, I kind of thought I had a couple different routes, and they weren't mutually exclusive, but I kind of thought I had the sports route, which would have been wrestling. And I didn't know where that was going to take me, coaching, potentially being an athlete somewhere else, or what that was going to lead me towards. But I was also very interested in school. I liked school. I liked learning, was, just intellectually curious, and kind of always knew I wanted to help people. And I didn't know a better way than becoming a physician. So that was kind of my goal and my route throughout college, I thought, was to try to become a physician. So the pre-med route at Iowa State. So jumped through all those hoops, whether that was taking the MCATs or volunteering or getting my EMT or whatever else I could do that I thought would look really good on paper when I was applying to med school. But obviously that didn't pan out for me. But learned a bunch and had some pretty good professors in college as well, just going that route, and kind of realized that I do like the medicine aspect of this. As I went out to Colorado following my now wife, then girlfriend, one of the first things I did besides getting a job was start volunteering as an EMT out in Fort Collins. And then we hopped to Steamboat. And then as we moved to Colorado Springs after a year of her doing her student teaching up in the mountains, first thing I did was apply to medic school.
And then you talked about your recruit experience and Rhino and sort of how those guys all shaped you into the service, which was really cool. I really love that story.
Yeah.
Let's jump ahead and talk about how you got into instructing.
Yeah. For the first 6 months, a year, 2 years, I don't quite remember now, I was just kind of there at work. I'd go to work and I'd try to be good at what I did, but didn't really take it home. Didn't really do anything above and beyond to try to be better than I already was. And then a name you already mentioned, but Ryan Torres, Rhino, started working with him and realizing how into the job he was, and his passion was inspiring. And so I started getting into the job, and then it was a contest between the two of us for who could read more. And then at some point, likely way too early on in my career to start actually teaching, I thought, hey, I've seen a lot and learned a lot of stuff that I wish I had learned 2, 3, 4, 5 years prior. I was super into fire dynamics and fire behavior. So this is pretty early on in some of the UL stuff. This was kind of when UL and NIST were still together. I went to a class by, I think, Lieutenant Cirillo at the time, John Cirillo, who now I believe is a battalion chief in FDNY, and two knucklehead firefighters from Colorado Springs. This was the name of their group. They were instructors. And so they were bringing in this instructor from FDNY to talk about ventilation, and being a suburban firefighter just outside Colorado Springs, I figured, who was into the job, figured I had to go to this class. And I was figuring we were going to learn about coffin cuts and 798 cuts and vertical ventilation and horizontal ventilation and all these things. And we did, but this was the first exposure I had. This was really early on in the horizontal study. So this horizontal study, I didn't even know if it had been released yet by UL, but UL wasn't the name in the fire service that it is today. This must have been, God, I might be getting this date wrong, but 2010-ish. And he talked for 4 hours or 8 hours, however long this class was, about ventilation. And it blew my mind, and it changed how I thought about ventilation and fire behavior and fire dynamics. So that was kind of the start of me really digging into this and learning about 3D firefighting, and Ed Harton and Stefan Svensson and Lars Augerstrad, now Axelson, Art Arnelich, and all these other players around the world and what they were doing, and got super into kind of studying fire dynamics. And at some point I thought, I think I have enough here for a class. Now, I was just parroting what I had seen and heard from all these other classes, which, to be honest, is still a lot of what I do as an instructor. I take good ideas and I just kind of parrot it, making sure that I give credit to where the credit is due. And I thought in our small little area, that was kind of my only goal. Initially, I did a little tiny bit of instructing for our department, but not much. I rode backwards at our department, and we had some other really good instructors there, so they did the majority of the work. But I thought, maybe I can teach a class here or there, kind of around our area. And for whatever reason, I went to some other classes and remember sitting in these classes, and I hope this doesn't come across too dickish, but I remember going to other people that are relatively well-known and really good instructors and better communicators than I'll ever be. But I'm like, their information isn't any better than mine. They do a better job at presenting this, but I'm like, I think I can do this. And so one day back in 2013, 2014, I thought, hey, let's try putting in for, some of these bigger conferences. And for whatever reason, they gave a balding short guy a chance at some of these bigger conferences. And so I've been lucky enough to, it's not like this is a career of mine as an instructor, but here and there I get a chance to go out and teach, and still get to do that to this day. And that kind of scratches one of the itches that I have. I think the whole goal of all of this, besides kind of spreading the information and letting people, hopefully turning them on to something they might not have seen before, was really really like kind of selfish as well. I wanted to get better, and I didn't know a better way to get better than to be an instructor. Last thing you want to do as an instructor is look like an idiot. So make sure that all my I's are dotted, all my T's are crossed. So it forced me to do a whole lot more research and reach out to some of these people that, I only knew of online and sit down with them and talk to them on the phone. So it was been really beneficial for me kind of selfishly as well, just being in the same orbit as a lot of these people. And then also not wanting to sound like an idiot. So making sure that it forces me to do all my homework.
Do you notice a difference in the people you meet that see themselves as a part of the fire service as a whole and not necessarily their local fire department?
I do. The first person I ever heard say something along these lines was Rhino. I forget exactly how he said it and what the context was, but I'm going to try to paraphrase him here. He said something along the lines of, I never realized the depth and breadth of the fire service until I went outside my department. I think a lot of us are kind of, for lack of a better word, kind of inbred within our departments. But once you get a chance to go see people 2 miles away, 2 hours away, 2,000 miles away, I think that really opens your eyes up to just the scope and scale of the fire service. And I think there's something, I don't know if it's just the fact that their eyes have been open by going to conferences or being involved in whatever other ways possible besides your own department. But what I really get from these people is I can feel not only their passion, but their why really speaks to me when I meet people at conferences or at classes or wherever else. So I don't quite know how to put my finger on it, and I can't really describe it really well. But I feel like the people that you meet at conferences, they're different, they hit different. And I think it's because their why might be a little bit more different. Maybe it's just a little easier to read their why.
And generally, would you feel like more open, more curious, more humility in general because they've seen enough things where they thought they knew something and they learned something new?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think that's a really wise phrasing that you just used. They're more open, they're more humble, because I didn't realize this. I think when we only compare ourselves to the people in the same room as you, it's relatively easy to feel pretty confident. But once that room starts expanding and the people that are filling that room are now people that you look up to and people that have been doing this for longer and doing it better than you and do it more often than you, I think it's really easy to be humbled in a good sense. Also, it's really, really hard once you're in a room with, and I'm just going to throw out some random names, but Champo and Steve Kerber and Derek Alconis or whoever these people are, and not have an open mind. When you listen to these people speak, you know that they're speaking from experience. Really, really hard not to have an open mind when these people talk. It's a lot easier when it's the three people at your station and somebody says something and you're like, nah, I know what he does. He only goes to the same fires that I go to. He's not going to more fires or reading as much. But yeah, I think there's something to that where people are more open and there's less ego in the room when you go to these places, which is kind of counterintuitive when you go into a room and you see all these people that are well known and could walk into most firehouses and people would know who they are. It seems like you'd have more ego there. But my experience has been that there's less ego there.
No one's going to go to a conference if they don't have a why, really. Why else would you go? You wouldn't spend the money and the time. You'd be doing something else.
Yeah, you can't be in the same room as Corley Moore and not feel his why. His purpose is right out front and it's on his sleeve and it's just multiplied by the passion.
Do you get frustrated that really the ignorance of what is out there is a choice now when you're trying to discuss something with some people and it's just there's a barrier there? It's still occurring. It's still very strong. Within the last week, I talked to 2 firefighters that are delving into instructing and they've had that old stereotypical thing thrown at them like, oh, we don't do that here or that's dangerous. People that haven't opened themselves up to realize that the fire service is bigger. And to me, it seems more like a choice. I'm just wondering about your take on it.
Yeah, I think I see both sides of this coin. I see my job as a firefighter, just period, but also in the fact that I'm a company officer now. Like my job is to inspire those that I get a chance to work with and interact with to try to and to want to, when they're at home, listen to a podcast or pay for a class here or there. So I feel like a lot of that is incumbent upon us as instructors and as advocates for the fire service. Is it frustrating? Absolutely. There is so much information. There's so much great information out there. There's so many local conferences that are still popping up. I bet no matter where you live in North America, I bet within like a 4-hour drive, at some point in the last year, there's been a conference. And I get that people have families and schedules are difficult at times. But it's also, there's so many good podcasts, multiple calls, make do H&H. It is somewhat of a choice. There's so much information. It's like drinking from a fire hose at times. And so I feel we should be trying to inspire people in what we're doing. That's you, that's me, that's anybody else who has somewhat of a microphone for the fire service. All the instructors and all the company officers and all the chief officers, we should be trying to champion this great cause of just sitting down, opening our eyes, opening our ears, and then hopefully eventually opening our pores and getting sweaty with some people as well, not in a weird way.
How did you get involved with the college?
In Wisconsin, almost all of the certification courses, that's your Fire 1, your Fire 2, your instructor, all those classes run through the Wisconsin Technical College system. So if you want to do any type of instructing that's not kind of like your own personal class, you're kind of hamstrung in this state where you have to go through the Wisconsin Technical College system. We're fortunate enough, I work for the Eau Claire Fire Department, where our Station 9 is literally attached to the Tech College. And it's attached to the wing of the Tech College that teaches law enforcement, emergency medical services, and fire service. So literally all you got to do is go across the bay. And when I first started, half of our bay was us. The other half of the bay was the Tech College. So oftentimes there's classes out there, there's instructors out there, there's trucks out there, there's people doing stuff. So I knew pretty early on, I was pretty motivated. I was always looking for a little extra money that I wanted to start instructing as well out here. I'd done a little bit out west, but I knew when I moved to Eau Claire that this was a good opportunity for me to hopefully share a little bit of that passion and knowledge, but also to learn a whole bunch more, like I alluded to earlier. And so probably 2/3 of the way through our 18-month probationary period, I said, okay, I think I'm on solid enough footing right now at our department where I can pick up a couple hours doing this. And we've had some really, really good instructors there. Marcy, Red, JD, Chris, Mark, and Chad, and all these really helpful, great instructors that were willing to help out in any way possible. So they've been a big help and have even let me teach a couple of my own classes. I get an opportunity every summer with two of my really good friends, Evan Larson and Taylor Quinnell, to do a class called Advanced Firefighting Concepts. It is just the basics of firefighting. This was kind of put together by Chris McHenry. He wanted mostly basic firefighting stuff, but also some interview stuff after he was getting feedback from a lot of the local departments that were hiring people with trying to shore up some of the weaknesses. It was kind of how they do the program around here is it's focused on fire for a year and then it's focused on paramedicine for a little over a year. And they don't really go back and touch on the fire. So it's a little bit rusty when they come back into the field. And then their interview skills weren't quite where they wanted them. So we did bring in an expert in that talks to all the students for 6 hours total, maybe with the mock interviews. So we get like 30 hours with these students to do throwing ladders and forcing doors and flowing hand lines and searching buildings. And we get to do it however we want to do it. It's not tied to any state curriculum. So we write the actual curriculum. We teach what we want to teach. So we get to teach strictly to the job. Sometimes there's kind of this weird divergence in the fire service where you either teach to the test or you teach to the job. Sometimes they're mutually exclusive. We've been fortunate enough in that class, we only get to teach to the job. We teach to, if they get a fire tomorrow at my house, this is how I want them to operate. So we don't have to teach them any other way. It's always been a really big frustration of mine to tell people, here's what you need to know for the test. And then either after they take the test or after you pause and take a breath, like, here's how we really do it. That's always been frustrating. I don't think that benefits anybody. And so trying to change that system from the inside a little bit as well. But that's a pretty big uphill battle here.
What about the Northland FOOLS? What was your experience like there?
Such a great group of people. I mean, there's actually a FOOLS meeting tonight, and John Schoenger is teaching the class, who's a great dude and helps out with FireNuggets. Unfortunately, I can't make it. Something local popped up that I got to do. But Northland FOOLS, so that's kind of the Minneapolis area, all the way into western Wisconsin, where I live currently. And I moved to Wisconsin back in the summer of 2013, and it was maybe a year later. I had touched base and met a bunch of engaged firefighters in Minnesota, and we were kind of talking behind the scenes like, hey, how do we keep this momentum going? How do we take this to the next level? And I don't remember whose idea it was, but they thought, let's start a Fools chapter. So I hope I'm not forgetting anybody. Kind of the five of us that kind of started the chapter initially, it was Becky White and Shay Filkowski, Brandon Buckley, and Josh Nelson. And relatively in short order, Jeff Rothmeyer was on board as well. And kind of right off the bat, there was, 12, 15, 20 of us that were all like-minded and just wanted to help spread the cure locally and kind of drive passion and enhance the fire service here locally. And we didn't know a better way to do it. So we started a Fools chapter, and it's been super beneficial to my career. Not only all the training that the Fools have done, but the networking and the friends that I've made from that have been people that I rely on to this day. If something important happens, Becky and Shay and Rothmeyer and Buckley are some of the first people I call.
Talk to me about the Grabs podcast, the FireNuggets podcast, and FireNuggets in general, because you've mentioned it. We've mentioned it a couple times here, but just walk me through how that all came to be.
Let's start with the Grabs podcast. This is Grant Schwalbe's baby, Chief Schwalbe. This was his idea, and I've told him this before, and I've maybe even said this before somewhere, but I still think this is one of the greatest ideas the fire service has had in our generation.
Yeah, completely agree.
It's the easiest way to get a little bit of motivation, a little bit of inspiration every day as you drive into work. His ideas like these short format, these 15 to 25 minute podcasts where somebody who made a rescue gets to tell you about the rescue that they made. So vicariously, you can make a rescue every 15, 20 minutes, right? If you're doing this right, you close your eyes, you visualize, you're kind of working through this, and you can learn from all these brothers and sisters that have actually made rescues. I, in my career, even though I focus a lot on search and on rescue, I've made 0 rescues in my life. So this is something that it's a really good way for you to get experience. Instead of talking within your department and talking to the 4 or 5 guys that have made rescues in the past 4 or 5 or 10 years or, however many rescues your department makes. Now we have, I don't even know where we're at right now, like 150 of these. Fortunate enough, for next week, we're going to do 2 more. I get to interview Chief Beal and El Presidente, Chris Slayer, FireNuggets former president, about a rescue they had. And then I'm also interviewing somebody out in Jersey who just made a rope rescue last week as well. So you can learn so much from these. And again, all credit goes to Grant. Grant's just a busy dude and needed some help at one point. And for whatever reason, reached out to myself. Justin McWilliams helps out with the Grabs podcast, and we've brought on other people as well. So Jeff Bryant's doing them now. Justin Lorenzen or J-Lo is doing them as well. So now we got a bunch of us. And what's great is that we just had this conversation yesterday via text is they seem to be like there's almost a social contagion. More and more people are finding out about this. More and more people want to record these episodes. More and more departments are okay with people recording these episodes. So every couple of days, it seems like somebody is contacting one of us. So love that idea, but all credit goes to Grant Schwalbe for that. The Nuggets podcast, from what I can remember, this idea was Jeff Bryant's, and he has had probably more great ideas for the fire service than anyone else that I'm aware of. The motor on this guy is just nonstop. We're good buddies. We talk pretty regularly. And at some point, he brought up this idea. I've been working with FireNuggets for a while, and he is now the president of FireNuggets. At some point, a handful of years ago, he came up with this, and we both thought it was a great idea. You can speak to this, and we've actually spoken about this. One of the greatest joys of my career is being able to do the podcast. Not that I think I'm a good podcaster by any stretch of the imagination, but I get a chance to sit with people that I have the utmost respect for and these kind of idols of mine or mentors of mine. And I get an hour or so with them, and I get to ask them whatever I want, which is unfair. But through that, it's been super beneficial, selfishly for me, and hopefully the fire service gets something out of it as well. We might not be the best podcasters. Jeff is definitely better than I am. I stumble over my words, as anyone listening to this can figure out. But we've got a chance to interview some really heavy hitters in the fire service. And the name FireNuggets goes a long way. It's been around for so long that sometimes it's hard, I think, for people that don't need to do a podcast with us to say no to FireNuggets. So we kind of lean on that a little bit too. And because of that, we've got a chance to interview some of the best the fire service has had over the past couple of generations. So super fortunate enough just to be a small part of that. Credit to that goes to Jeff Bryant. The other people that help out with that are Lane Zahorik out of Wichita, Justin Lorenzen out of Oklahoma City, and Jeff Rothmeyer out of Milwaukee. And a couple other people have popped in for an episode or two here or there. Brush helped interview Ben Schultz a little while ago, and Greg Redmond out of St. Louis. Him and I are trying to interview a couple authors that we really like as well. So fingers crossed that we get a chance to interview some other people as well.
Yeah, speaking of podcasts, when you guys were gracious enough to have me on, you asked me to give you the hit list, and obviously Grabs was on that one for sure. But I neglected to mention one that you and I both really love, which is Mission Critical Teams Institute Teamcast, which is a really strange name for the podcast. I don't think it's a very well-known one, but it has super high value for the fire service. So maybe just give me your take on that and why you enjoy it so much.
Yeah, I was turned on to them through Leadership Under Fire. And I don't remember where I first heard about Leadership Under Fire, but I'm kind of taking this a little bit more circuitous here because I want to make sure I give props to Leadership Under Fire. But what they've kind of focused on, and there's this good Mattis quote that like the most important 6 inches on the battlefield is right between your ears. And they take that same mindset for the fire service. And another group that does kind of the same thing, a little bit more broad in scope, is Mission Critical Teams Institute. And they're going to do a much better job of defining what a mission critical team is. But it's people that kind of, my paraphrasing is they have to make life or death decisions in a group setting in under 300 seconds. 300 seconds being about how long the brain can go without oxygen. So they get to interview and talk to astronauts and warriors, anyone in law enforcement, emergency room physicians and surgeons, and all these people from just maybe a little bit broader scope, and talk to them about those 6 inches between your ears. What are you thinking about when you do this? And they've interviewed some of the coolest people in the world. And I love that idea. And what I really respect about the Teamcast is their focus on the team. I think too often in life, in the fire service, in sport, in other domains where we have these mission critical teams, people always talk about the individual. They're on an island by themselves. I want to talk with the whole team, and I want to talk as a team. This is maybe not the best analogy, but I always think of like Phil Jackson with this. He's had a bunch of individual personalities that he's had to navigate. You got Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen and Shaq, Dennis Rodman and Kobe, all these big personalities. But how do you get them to mesh together, to play together? It's not just that you're focusing on Michael Jordan and working on Michael Jordan's take or working on Kobe's shot or Shaq's free throws or whatever it is. We're going to have all 5 of us on the court together, and we're going to work together as a team. And I think sometimes that's the missing piece. Sometimes that's a frustration of mine too, going to conferences, and the people that need to be in the room aren't always in the room. I mean, it's easy to point the finger at the chiefs that aren't there. But what I want is entire crews that are there. I want the entire crew to be there going through this hands-on evolution. I want this entire crew to get this information, because when one person has that information, it's good, but it's not nearly as good or beneficial as when the whole team has it. And I think that's what the Teamcast has kind of enlightened for me is like, yes, the entire crew. How do we bring our crew into this together? I see my job as a company officer right now to make sure that our crew is as good as we can be. Not me individually, not Isaac, not Stevie. It's our crew. So let's work together. Let's figure out our weaknesses. Let's lift everybody up in that crew. It's no good if 2 of us are really, really good, but one of us is down here. We need to make sure all 3 of us are rising. 3 being how many we ride on our rig.
It surprises me when I hear about departments that don't have set roles on their apparatus, or they don't have set plays. You know, they can easily call it as an officer, and this is what we're doing. Initially, at least, this is what we're going to do. And then even though each property might be slightly different and the layout of the house might be slightly different, all house fires kind of operate within the same realm, but very often it's every fire is different, and then we end at that and we throw everything out, and then we just show up and figure it out. So what I find with the Teamcast, and they are talking, like you said, ER, doctors, surgeons, they are a bit more structured because they're in a controlled environment. They have all their tools out. They know where they're standing. It is a bit more structured in that way, but they are dealing with random people that come in with random issues. But it's really cool how they break down what their roles are and how they all communicate and how they operate, and then how they pull it apart afterwards and see if they were in the right place and did I communicate that in the right way. They really dive deep into how each incident went. And I'm just surprised that we're not doing that as much in the fire service. I think it's getting better.
Yeah, I absolutely think that we could be doing better. Something that I heard recently, kind of when you're talking about some of this structure, this is from the Teamcast actually. I forget who they were talking to, but they were talking about, and I'm going to get kind of the verbiage wrong. They had a more appropriate phrase for it, but having some type of routine when you get off the rig. So the first 10 seconds, 20 seconds, everybody knows exactly what they're doing. It's not that I open the door to the rig and I look out and I don't know where to look. I always look for the same things. I think we do a really good job at this in the medical side of what we do, just because we get the sets and reps there. Most of us who run fire service-based EMS, we're running on medical calls a good hunk of the day. And so we know exactly what we're going to do. Here's how the first 20 seconds goes. I think we can do the same thing on the fire side with this. A lot of this is just going to be tool assignments and arrival order and arrival assignments and making sure that we have these plays set out. But if I can spend those first 20 seconds kind of in rote memory, that really opens my eyes up to really take in what I'm seeing. Where is the fire? How many windows or doors do I see this in? What's the vent profile like of this structure? Is there anybody outside that might have really useful information? Where are the other crews at and what are they doing at this point in time? And so a lot of this becomes rote. This is maybe a little bit abstract, but I remember talking to my brother, Scotty. His friend was a professor and he saw something, and I'm going to get the specifics of this wrong, but I think it was published in the Harvard Business Review. So I went and looked it up and printed it out. These students looked at what separates the top 10 tennis players in the world from the other 150 on tour or whatever. And they looked at all these metrics and they couldn't find what separated them. So they're looking at ground stroke velocity, number of unforced errors, number of winners, first serve percentage that's in, first serve speed, second serve percentage that's in, double faults, all these kind of metrics that they're looking at, thinking that they're going to find some type of smoking gun. My recollection from this study is what they found out that the top 10 or 15 players in the world had more of a routine than everybody else. So the same thing every time they serve, same thing every time they're going to receive it, same thing in between after they return the ball and they're waiting. They do the same thing every time, that they're more structured in their routine than the other players are. And it sounds small, but the difference between the top 10 players in the world and the next 10 players of the world is relatively small. So again, this is kind of that 6 inches between their ears. If I can take a lot of this off my plate and really focus on some of the more important details, and if I can be coached on what those important details are, now we can operate better. And I think that as a fire service, we can be doing a better job of this.
I think the paradox with things that you do that are unconscious is that you're not conscious of them because you just do them. And so you're not noticing how much they drive your behavior. So one thing that stands out to me is as we got new apparatus, they were moving the parking brake around and it wasn't in the same spot. And I would get a different apparatus. And every time we go to pull out or every time you have to operate the parking brake, I was reaching and touching the dash where it used to be. And I would recognize that it's different. And I still, every time I would get in, I would do the same movement. It would frustrate me and have to reach up and look for where it is. I would have to change my routine. I think there's so many of those things that we do that unless you're paying attention or something forces you to recognize that something's changed and you have that habit, you're not as aware that your operating system is like that, right? And then you are benefiting and you are more efficient and more effective because of them.
It's funny how sometimes just a small little change can throw you off your game. And I think it's hard to measure some of those downstream effects sometimes, but I'm positive that it's a non-zero number as well. You get messed up off your game just a little bit. If you're a D-back, you bump your receiver at the line. He wasn't expecting it. Now his route's going to be a little bit messed up. The timing's a little bit off. And it seems small. Something as where's the parking brake at can really kind of throw you out of your rhythm a little bit. But I think there's something to this routine. If you look at some of the best free throw shooters in the world, and we can do this to baseball or whatever, right? The baseball players that have the highest batting average, I bet their routines as they step into the box and in between pitches is probably pretty identical every single time. I do think there's something there to this, though.
Yeah. Recently, there was in the news, I can't remember what football player it was that kept fixing his hair when he went to put his helmet on, almost like a nervous tick. And people were making fun of it, but we all have those as well, these movements that we do. And then they obviously highlighted hitters because baseball hitters have that same, it's like cleat, glove, helmet, step in, adjust. Yeah, it's over every single time they go to hit the ball, they do exactly the same thing. And you talked about this on the H&H podcast, and you gave credit where credit was due, as you always do, but inserting the constants where there are variables. So if you can mask up the same way every single time and you get really fast at it, even if you get 80% of that on a call, you're better than if you had no way of doing something. Here's your big lead-in question.
Okay.
About your experience and then the lens you sort of see the fire service through. It's common to hear that firefighters say they're into the job to help people. They say it in the interview, they say it when they talk to people, but within the walls of the firehouse and now kind of on social media, they're vocal about their distaste for EMS, right? And it's often used as a way to signal to the cool kids that you're part of the club, right? I don't like EMS calls, I only want to run jobs. What I've come to realize that many firefighters want to help people, but in kind of the way that they want to help them. They want to help on the fringes, right? Like I want to cut the car, I want to remove the person, I want to drag the body out of the house fire, I want to carry the person in the stair chair. But what this can lead to is what I see as poor BLS skills, getting in intimately with somebody and actually helping them in that way. And it's kind of ironic because the guys that are ignoring the EMS basics are usually guys that are also preaching about the basics and fundamentals of firefighting, right? And how that's a core main goal. They can have a real impact on saving lives. And the majority of calls we go to they involve people, right? Even house fires, which guys see as the farthest thing from an EMS call, they hinge on patient care as like the main goal. I don't know how it is where you are, but house fires where we are, that you get one ambulance. And it's usually parked hundreds of feet from the house. And it's assumed somehow that we're only going to have one victim and none of us are going to get hurt, right? So who else is doing the BLS care for people while the medics supposedly are just around the corner and going to save the day? And then lastly, like MVCs, right? If the medic can't get into the mangled car, then it's kind of on us to stop the bleeding and keep them breathing. So we do a great job of cutting the car, but if the main goal isn't focused on, we kind of fail the citizen, right? I kind of see this as like an elephant in the fire service, and we're not doing anybody any favors by shitting on the EMS side of things. So the question to you is, like, coming into the service through EMS, how has that shaped the lens you see the job through and kind of driven your passion for search and then our main objective of saving lives? And have you always had this victim-centered mindset with the job, and did that sort of come through EMS?
You saying that this is the elephant in the room is pretty apropos, I think. I get, and I agree with a lot of people that the majority of our EMS calls aren't nearly as sexy as some of our high acuity, low frequency type calls, our high risk, low frequency type calls, your MVCs, your structure fires, your tech rescues. I completely would agree with that statement because I feel the same way. Pulling somebody out of a house fire to me is going to be sexier than lifting up somebody for the third time today that, is 95 years old and has stage 4 cancer and just needs a little bit of help getting up. I hope this doesn't come across too cheesy, but our why, our purpose, as Simon Sinek says, I'm going to lean on him a couple times throughout this answer probably, but our why is a journey of discovery. It's not an invention. We really need to have this kind of introspective look about why we're here. We can all kind of parrot and say that we're here for them. I do believe that the vast majority of people that are doing this, that's why they got into this. But I think we need to be introspective. And what does that really look like, especially when you're running 7 calls today or 10 calls today, and the majority of those are going to be EMS calls. I try to, and I'm sure I've failed at this before, is I try to make sure that every single call we go on, I'm going to treat that person like it's my mom. Insert who you love the most in the world, and that's who this patient is for the next 10, 15, 20 minutes. And treat them like you would want them to be treated. It sounds so cliche, but I think there's actual value in that. When we step back and we're introspective and we really kind of figure out why we're doing this, it sounds so weird that we need to keep coming back to the why. You can tell I read Start With Why not too long ago. But I think we need to be honest with ourselves, and we really need to make sure that all of our actions pass this celery test, as Sinek talks about as well. Celery test being, if you preach healthful eating to your kids and all these habits that make them healthy over the long run, working out and stretching and focus on mental health, and then they ask you what they should have for a snack, if you tell them they should eat M&Ms over celery, your actions don't quite match your words. So I think oftentimes if we're honest with ourselves, our actions don't always match our words. I think lots of times people say this in jest and just to get a laugh and just to kind of lighten the mood in the room. And I have zero problem with that. I do think sometimes there's some negative side effects that go with that as well. If somebody hears this enough and from some people that are pretty darn influential, I think it can have a negative impact on some people's mindset. It normalizes this kind of like, I don't care. I don't have to care on these calls. That's not my job. That's their job. We don't do EMS at my department. So I think there is some negatives to that. And I think we just need to be mindful with our words and our actions and make sure that our actions are going to pass this celery test. If we are preaching in one context that we're here for them and we're going to help people, and then the other breath or the next line or an hour later in your presentation, you are maybe saying something that doesn't align with that, people can kind of see through that. And then if you are just joking, just make sure everyone knows that this is just a joke and you're just trying to get a laugh and add a little bit of levity to some of these classes that are pretty serious.
Do you think it's kind of arrogant of us to just choose how we want to help, what we want to do? Whereas if we are true servants of the community, then we help in the way that they need us to help. And then my second thought is, There's a lot more opportunities to save lives and impact people immediately with good BLS skills. You think of even just suctioning someone's airway and breathing for them. If you keep them from going VSA, you have saved their life. And that's happened more times in my career than any other house fire I've ever been to. So when you go in with this almost excitement of knowing that there may be an opportunity, and how many apartment fires do you go to that are just alarm bells before you go to an actual apartment fire? So how many EMS runs do you go to that are quote unquote nothing, where they could have driven themselves to the hospital, but then you get the one where if you get breathing for them, you're going to save their life, or you give the symptom assist at the right moment. So there's real opportunity there to save people's lives when you don't get that every day. Well, you do get the opportunity every day. Maybe people just don't see it.
Yeah, you use the word arrogant. I think you're close. I think you're in the orbit. I don't know if I have a better word for this. Selfish, absolutely arrogant. Yep. I think there's another word that I just can't put my finger on right now.
Short-sighted?
Yeah, for sure it's myopic. I think it's disheartening as well. I see this as not just in EMS and other calls. I see this very blatantly when it comes to public education as well. Through writing codes and through public education, we will absolutely save more lives than we ever will by pulling people out of a fire. Now, that's kind of one of my primary missions. I don't want to negate the importance of pulling people out of fires because nobody else in the world can do that besides us. But I see the same thing in public education. I see the same thing in EMS. And it's something I think we probably need to have an open, honest conversation about as a fire service. I think we can do better.
You really enjoy quantifying things. We can't really quantify the benefit of fire prevention. You can't quantify the incidents that don't happen.
I'm excited for NARIS. Absolutely, when it comes to fire prevention, we'll never know some of these. I'm excited to see with NARIS. I think we're going to start potentially having some numbers. We're going to miss a bunch of them. But I think we'll know how many people escaped prior to our arrival. I think we'll know how many assists or evacuations we helped with. That's something that we don't even capture at this point in time. And if we do capture them, sometimes they get captured as a civilian injury. So it kind of looks like a loss, when in actuality, from a different perspective, or maybe a more accurate perspective, it's either a rescue on our side, or maybe it was a self-rescue on their side, or maybe the fire alarm that they had alerted them and they got out before anything bad happened. So I'm excited to see what maybe some of those numbers start showing. I'm excited to see what data we start collecting and then how we're going to utilize that data.
You know better than most that data can get messy, and really how you capture it and how you analyze it matters.
Yeah, I learned that the hard way.
Right.
Learned the hard way because we've asked some really poorly worded questions and had some really poorly worded answers for Firefighter Rescue Survey. I think we're doing much better because we brought on a bunch of people that are much smarter than I am. We found a bunch of our errors. I'm sure there's still stuff that we're missing right now, but we've had the opportunity to course correct over the past 8 years.
Yeah, I'm sure it's something you're constantly chasing. And you've brought up, too, a very valid point that a lot of the data numbers, even before the Firefighter Rescue Survey, there's a lot of underreported rescues. What is underreported? What are we not hearing about?
Well said. I think in this next year, I'm privy to a little bit of behind the scenes stuff. I can't talk about it, but I think that we're going to find out some numbers in the not too distant future. I don't have a timeline on this that are going to potentially rock the fire service. So I'm excited to see what the fire service does with that information when it's made public.
I'm excited to see the data on the Mayday survey as well.
Yeah, what Basil and crew are doing with that, I'm really excited about. And I loved what Don Abbott did, but I love how this new group, Firefighter Mayday Survey, is going to be completely transparent. So we're all going to have access to this data. It's not going to be filtered kind of through one group or one person. All of us at any given time are going to have access to this data. Super excited to see that.
You gave a really great backstory on the 2 in, 2 out paper. What impact are you seeing since that's been written? How's that progressing?
Yeah, I guess all the impact that I've seen right now has kind of been discussions at this point in time. For those that aren't familiar, what they're trying to do is kind of rebrand, repackage, and update the firefighter brigade standard into this emergency response standard. We were already working on this project, we being Sean Duffy and Chief Thompson and Chris Thompson, Don Abbott before he passed, and Bill Carey. I think I got everybody. We were working on this behind the scenes already, over 2 years before we found out about the ERS. But then we kind of had to speed up our timeline, which was a good thing because ERS was now being released and there was open for public comments. And we wanted this information in everybody's hands because we thought we had compiled a bunch of useful information for everybody. And we just needed to make sure we were able to communicate that data to everybody. So open for public comments, quite a few public comments that talked about 2 in, 2 out, just doing a really brief search. If I type in the word 2 in or 2 - in or something like that, there was a handful of 100. people that made public comments. And then there was testimony that you could go to. And I only saw about 2 days of testimony, not even 2 full days. And I was the only one who talked about 2 in, 2 out in our testimony that I saw. There was like 15 to 20 days of testimony. So I easily could have missed a bunch. But most of the talk was about what this is going to do to the volunteer fire service and combination-based fire service. A lot of really good discussion. I don't know if we've moved the needle, and I don't know when we'll know if we've actually moved the needle. When I say move the needle, is the 2 in, 2 out, or what we refer to as 2 in, 2 out, is going to be removed or reworded from the ERS. It's already kind of the new version and old version. It's already a little bit more restrictive, but they need to okay that new version. The 2 restrictions that they have on it is before you could forego 2 in, 2 out. This is part of the respiratory protection standard, if people aren't familiar with what 2 in, 2 out means. But there was 2 changes, one of them being before you could have anything that you deemed emergency rescue operations, you could forego 2 in, 2 out. So if your spidey sense was telling you that there's somebody inside, something didn't quite seem right, you saw maybe something move inside, whatever it was, you could forego 2 in, 2 out in the name of an immediate rescue or what you thought might be an immediate rescue with incomplete information, time compressed environment, uncertainty forcing you to make a decision really quickly. So this is kind of where some of that Mission Critical Teams Institute stuff comes in there. Now, how it's currently written and needs to be okayed by OSHA is you can only go inside if somebody tells you to your face that somebody's inside, or they tell you via phone that somebody's inside, or you actually see somebody inside with your own 2 eyes. So that's one of the 2 big changes. The other one is it just now explicitly states that 2 in, 2 out is not to be used to enhance your staffing or to keep 4-person staffing on your rig. So it tells you this is no longer a valid way to use 2 in, 2 out, which is maybe the one good thing that 2 in, 2 out did in the past, is people could at least utilize that to try to enhance their staffing or to keep their staffing if maybe city administrators or the city was coming after it. So I don't know. I don't quite know what this all has in store for us. I've had a lot of good discussions with a lot of really good people, but the ball's in their court. So I guess we'll see.
Have you had a few how did I get here moments over the past few years where I feel like almost you say you get into nozzles, next thing you know you're into spec and trucks, you're like, how the hell did that happen? I just wanted to change the nozzle. Like, have you had those moments over these past couple of years?
Yeah, a lot of times, like, you end up in a committee or on a group or talking to somebody, and when you start thinking about the path that led you there, you're like, wow, that was all over the place. Now, this is probably going to miss a whole lot of people's heads, but do you remember those family circus cartoons?
Oh, yeah.
Some kid just is going to go across the street, but he like goes all over the place. That's what I feel like so often in my fire service career. I'm on an NFPA committee. Like, how did I get on that committee? Well, I went to this class and I heard Chief Halton talk. And then before that, it was this thing. And before that, it was fools. And you're like, geez, that was a long way to get right here.
Sometimes following squirrels, it's a good thing.
Yeah, 100%. And sometimes it's just like, I can't believe I snuck past the guard. When I got on the UL tech panel years ago, I'm like, they let my dumbass in here? What were they thinking? Like, who did I fool?
Yeah, we look around and think, there's no one else? Isn't someone else?
Yeah, like the bouncer went and took a pee and I snuck in real quick.
Yeah.
So for sure, for a bunch of stuff that I've been allowed to do in my career and had the opportunity to do, not only am I really lucky, but somebody probably messed up as well. But I took full advantage of it. I use this quote all the time, but that you miss 100% of the shots that you never take. The Wayne Gretzky, Michael Scott quote.
You mentioned mental health earlier on, so maybe walk me through your journey and that aspect of your life, opening up your eyes and seeing the job and personal life different, and how they coalesce and impact each other.
I don't think I'm alone here. I've always been somebody who could understand physical ailments, could understand when somebody was hurt, could touch a broken arm, could see that somebody had a fever, could obviously read a blood pressure that was off the charts or was going down the toilet. For me, the mental side of stuff was always this little mystery. Like, there was some type of magic to it that I couldn't quite put my hands on. And sometimes it's obvious if somebody's had a traumatic brain injury, but this stuff was always difficult for me to really comprehend. It's this invisible force, and certain things affect different people different ways. And that didn't make as much sense to me as other aspects of medicine. I haven't had a whole lot of difficulties in calls in my career. At least I hadn't up to a certain point. And there's been a couple times in my life, I can think of 2 calls that have absolutely affected me on some levels, and I don't even know the extent of how they've affected me necessarily. And then I've had a pretty big life event as well that is, I don't know a better bucket to put it in other than kind of this mental health thing. So I'm not eloquent when I speak to this at all. It's just kind of rambling, and we're talking about something that is emotional and limbic brain, and my neocortex has a hard time kind of connecting these two and actually kind of verbalizing the difficulties I've had, the struggles, the self-doubt, the questioning. Probably the biggest one for me is, and I think this is a human condition, is I'm my biggest critic. So I've beaten myself up quite a bit on a couple things in my life. I've had 2 calls that have no doubt affected me. I think one of them more so than the other one. We ran a pretty horrific call earlier this morning. I'm sure that will leave some type of ghost or scar. And it's something that I'm cognizant of, but I've never talked to anybody professionally about this. I've always had really good friends that I could open up to, and I got a beautiful wife, and I don't really talk to my kids about some of this stuff necessarily. I've talked about my brother with my kids a little bit, but not quite to the level that I hope to one day. They're just not old enough yet. I mean, my oldest is 13 right now.
The complicated processing that goes on in your own brain and your relationship with what happened.
Yeah. I wish I was better at some of this stuff.
I think this is the way it needs to be talked about, though, because this is the way it is in your brain. From when you first started learning, and I first started learning about fire dynamics and fire behavior, we were super clunky. And we were learning all these different names you mentioned, and Grimwood and Layman, and you're trying to piece together this article with that article, and well, that doesn't make sense with this one, and you're trying to make sense of that. And it's so much I don't think people really understand that. When you watch a good speaker or a good instructor teach something very, very clearly and concisely, they have no idea the effort that went into trying to formulate those thoughts from the mess of stuff that's out there. And it's harder than it ever has been now with how much information is available. So you really get down some rabbit holes. You start to doubt yourself and question yourself. So what I'm saying with all that is I think this is what this is. As we get better at figuring out what this is, we're going to do it in a super clunky way, but it's the only way we can do it until we get really clear about it.
Yeah, and I think those problems that we have with some of these things that are kind of, for lack of a better word, some of these hard sciences and hard skills when it comes to firefighting and when it comes to fire behavior and dynamics, I think these problems and difficulties are multiplied or exponential when it comes to something that is emotional and I can't quantify. If we're going to talk about my brother. So my brother, Brett, he was 7 years older. He had some liver disease. It was likely caused by drinking too much. There is some other liver disease in our family as well. There's probably a genetic component to this. But at some point in time, he needed to have a liver transplant. He knew this before I did. So he reached out to myself and my other brother to go, hey, I know you guys are busy and you don't need to do this, but do you think it would be possible for you to see if maybe you could donate part of your liver? So if people don't know, we only get one liver, but if you donate one of your lobes of your liver, it grows back in ourselves. So, besides the surgery and all the problems that go with it, you end up with a whole liver when all is said and done, as long as everything is done correctly. And the other person's, the smaller lobe that you give them, ends up growing to an entire liver as well. So it's not like a kidney where you have 2 to begin with, but you're going to lose one of those if you end up donating it. So my liver was the right size for him, and it had the right vasculature where this was going to work. And it's kind of a long process. We were going through the Mayo hospital system. Since we're in the Midwest here, they're kind of the mother hospital system around here. He was living in Minnesota at the time. I was living in Wisconsin. We were a handful of hours away, but Rochester was kind of in between us. It's a long process, a whole bunch of lab tests, a whole bunch of testing, a bunch of stuff that needed to be done, both for me and for Brett. When we agreed to this, it was probably the beginning of the school year. Now, my wife's a teacher, and to me, it made the most sense to my recovery and to my family to do this the first week of summer. Then I'll have plenty of time to recover. Okayed it with my job, and they were okay with all this as well. It's just kind of a lot of appointments. Sometimes I'd go with him for his appointments. We'd meet at Rochester. Sometimes I could do stuff here in our backyard. We got a mail system here. And after they realized I lived in Eau Claire, they're like, well, you could do some of this there. I'm like, well, let's do that. That saves me a bunch of drive time, and it's just easier for everybody. He was kind of deteriorating both physically and mentally. This was a bunch of stress on him as well. His marriage was suffering. And just all these things were kind of piling up on him. And at one point in time, after he had a doctor's appointment that day and he didn't get the information that he wanted and wasn't doing as good as he thought, he went back and he drank. And Mayo has this kind of proprietary test, evidently. I was unaware of this, where the next time he went in, they did a urine test and they could figure out if he drank in like the past month or the past couple of weeks. So they realized that and they said, well, now we got to kick you out of this program. We're not going to do a liver transplant on you if you're still drinking. As far as I know, he was honest with them, said, I was weak one night. I did have a couple drinks. Is there anything else I could do? So they then punted this and said, all right, well, we're going to look at this in 6 months. We're going to push your surgery back 6 months. You still need to remain on course. If you drink again, you are out, and there is no coming back from that. And we were pretty certain that his liver disease was terminal. And so it was kind of get a liver transplant or die, unfortunately. And so now we were pushed back 6 more months. And within probably a month and a half or 2 months of this, he got really, really sick and he passed. And I can't tell you how many times in my head I've thought, if we would have just bumped the timeline up, we probably could have got this done earlier. How selfish was it of me to try to work this around my schedule when he is fucking terminal? And I'll never know the answer if we could have bumped it up. I think we probably could have. It would have been slightly more inconvenient for my wife and my kids, but would it have changed the outcome? And I'll never fucking know. And within 3 months of that piss test, he was no longer with us, unfortunately. So that's something that I can't quantify at all. And I don't talk about it with a ton of family and friends, but I'm lucky enough that I got a great wife that I can talk to her about this. My parents, my other brother, some other really good friends. It doesn't come up very often. And sorry to trauma dump on you right now.
No, there's no apologies at all.
It's something that's so hard. This is emotional, and it's crazy how the emotional brain and your rational brain don't communicate very well. And that's why sometimes it's hard to say why you love your wife, why you love your parents, and what love is. We know it, we can feel it, we can sense it, but it's really hard sometimes, especially for me, to try to put some of this stuff into words. It's crazy how these things that are the most indelible in my life, I have the hardest time just communicating my thoughts and my feelings on this stuff to other people without it sounding clunky and forced and ugly or whatever else.
Yeah, I think that's the way thoughts and emotions, like you said, they try to communicate, and you're trying to put something that you can't put in words. Talking to people is critical. It doesn't have to be therapists. It shouldn't be sold as a fix-all. I think it's one of the things you can do.
Meaning therapy or talking or both?
Yeah. Have you found any physical therapy that may help move things through your body, like breath work? Or recently I did a session called tension release exercises, which was phenomenal. And maybe this is where things like cold plunging and saunas, it doesn't solve the heartache and the heartbreak or the confusion, the frustration, the emotions. But this idea that these things, if we don't try to move them through our body, that they can bog us down and shut us down and even have a physical impact on us. Even if the intensity of the experience isn't going to get solved, if you don't move the pain as it wells up through your body and get it out, that it can have real detrimental effects. I'm just wondering if you've had any experiences where physical activity or physical focus therapy like that at least helps the symptom relief and helps it so you can breathe again. And maybe that helps in turn process things.
I've done meditation and some breath work and yoga and saunas and some other physical things, but nothing's really been focused on anything specific. It's all just kind of been general. Let's focus on Nick, not let's focus on this event or this trauma or these thoughts. So maybe that's something that would be beneficial to me.
I mean, I haven't learned whether it needs to be, like maybe that's where the talking, the therapy portion of it is the focus. But these other therapies that are out there that maybe people discount, they are general. They don't need to be focused on a thing. And whatever wells up and comes up because it comes up, it obviously just needed to come up and come out.
Yeah.
You were carrying it and you were having a hard time carrying it and you didn't know. And even though it doesn't fix, like I said, the cause of the issue, it helps move that intensity, that energy through you. The purpose of it is just to be general, and whatever happens during. I mean, I've had it happen in yoga, and more often than not, when I get into certain poses, I'll have like emotional release and I have no idea where it's coming from. I guess I could probably nail it down to a few things that it's coming from, but I don't need to tie it to a thing.
Yeah.
It obviously just needed to happen, right? Where, you're watching a movie and there's a super emotional moment, you just well up, right? And sometimes you can tie it to something, sometimes you can't. Maybe you're just a little more open and your body's just allowing it, and it was sitting there waiting to release. So yeah, I just thought I'd mention it as like an opportunity to consider as a way to just move pain through you, not that it's necessarily going to stop the pain from filling back up.
The last part that you stated as far as like watching movies, that totally resonates with me. When I'm trying to kind of do this post hoc rationalization for this, the closest I can come back to is ever since I've become a father, some of these sappy movies, rom-coms, commercials sometimes, that hits different now than it did when I was 18 years old or something. There's been more times than I'd like to admit where I'm watching a movie and I get all glassy eyed and tears might not fall, but part of that's just because I'm fighting it so hard and just hoping that the wife doesn't look over at me as she's just watching a normal movie and I'm sitting there, with tears getting ready to fall out of my eyes. Go, don't look at me, act cool. Like, don't let her know that you're sniffling right now. So that part totally resonates with me.
I think we need permission, though. I think we need permission for whatever, and I think we're bad at this as guys. I watched a reel just this morning, and it was talking about, and I've seen it a few times, about how men don't necessarily have permission to be angry, especially now. You're not allowed to get angry. If you do, it's toxic or aggressive, or it'll be dangerous. So we're not really taught that if emotions come up, and then how do you, in a healthy way, accept it and just allow it and then communicate it. And it doesn't mean it needs to be communicated in this super soft, perfect way, but how do you communicate when you're actually angry? And why can't we communicate when we're welling up? I mean, if we're at a firefighter funeral and we're all sitting there, and I've been to my share, it seems like we have permission in that space.
Yes.
But we don't necessarily allow ourselves, even in our own home, sitting with our wife, to like break down. And what if that just needed to come out, even if it's not tied in? Why does it have to be tied to a trait or a characteristic or a quality of who you are? Why isn't it just something that happens to you and you're like, wow, that was crazy. And you feel a bit better and then you move on, right? Why isn't that allowed?
I like what you said there. I'm going to change this slightly. And to me, it's not so much the anger that I think is a difficulty of mine. I think it is the physical act of sadness and crying. For me, oversharing right now. When I was a kid, I hated losing. I hated losing so much. I still don't like to lose, but I'm a much different person and competitor now than I was as a kid. So if I struck out in baseball, I probably went back to the bench and started crying. If I made an error on the baseball field, if I lost in wrestling, for sure I was crying. And I did this for longer than was acceptable. Like as a kindergartner, that's acceptable. As a first grader, I'm making arbitrary numbers here, but as a first grader, and maybe a little bit less acceptable. I was doing this well past it was acceptable, like fourth grade, fifth grade, maybe something like that. Like I did a better job of hiding it, but if I struck out or if I was pitching and, a team threw up 4 runs on me in an inning, I was probably teary-eyed at the very least. I was pouting for sure. And so it was pretty well ingrained, partly because I was so sensitive about losing and sadness as a kid, that that's not acceptable. And I feel like there's some type of leftover scarring for me where, again, maybe some post hoc rationalization here, but that's in my head one of the reasons that I find it so difficult to cry. Now, we do have some of these kind of safer places, safer spaces or whatever. If you're at a funeral, that's okay to cry and kind of expected. If it's something else that's incredibly sad and traumatic, sure, that's okay for you to do that. But oftentimes, some of these smaller things, for me in my head, it's act cool, act tough, be a man here right now or whatever. Even though no one's really said that to me, it's kind of this internal dialogue that I have. And I think a lot of this is just in my own head. I'm sure I heard it elsewhere at some point in time. But yeah, it's hard for me. It's not the anger stuff for me. It's the sadness stuff that I have this guilt about, which seems so weird to me. Rationally, I know that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it's there nonetheless.
I think there's something there about what you said about the longer than it was acceptable. And obviously, it doesn't make sense if you're in your 50s and if someone hits a home run on you that you break down and curl up on a ball in the pitcher's mound. Like, I tend to do this with a lot of things. I mean, maybe it's frustrating to some, I don't know, but there's always these extremes. Why is it complete shutdown, nothing, no emotion ever? Why is the other one, at the drop of anything, you're just an absolute mess. Those both seem kind of unhealthy to me. There's something there that you can work through to gain a healthier relationship with your emotions so you're not on one end of the spectrum or the other. It's ethereal because it's somewhere in the middle there and you can't quantify it again. So what is that? We kind of know what it is, but we don't. I wrestle with it a lot. You're an overthinker too, so I figured I'd run it by you.
A lot of that definitely I can relate to. One thing I think the fire service has done better in my relatively short time doing this, I came on the job in '07 or doing EMS in '05 or '06. The fire service, at least where I have worked, has had kind of this almost paradigm shift. Maybe that's a little bit of hyperbole, but I know when I came on the job, you ran a pretty traumatic call. It was kind of like, toughen up, you got to go back out there. Your tones are dropping again. I mentioned 2 calls that have kind of stuck with me. The second one, literally we dropped the kid off in the ED and I came out, and this one hit way different than any other call I'd ever run. And from that point forward, even I came out into the bay where our ambulance was and just started crying. My partner was a really good friend of mine. He had a young kid at home as well and kept it together, for maybe lack of a better word, until I dropped the kid off, had the cot, went back to the bay, and then right then I needed 5-10 minutes. And he was great about it. My partner, we came back to the station and the rest of the guys from the truck were outside waiting for us to restock our rig and to help us all out. Our officer called our battalion chief. They took us out of service for an hour. One thing I thought had a big ROI for us is I only lived like 2 miles away from this station at the time, or 1.5 miles away. So I had my wife and kids stop by for half hour. I took a shower, changed clothes. Wife was there with the kids, hung out for a little bit. And I called my partner's wife and told her to do the same. And she lived about 25-30 minutes away. And what's great is that she's a therapist. She teaches psychology. She is a practicing clinician as well. So like, you couldn't have a better person to have in his corner for this, in our corner, really. She helps out our department as well. Whether it's CISDs or whether it's anything else a department might need. She does mental health training for us. So Julie has been awesome. But that wouldn't have happened when I first started my career. And now it's kind of the norm when we have calls like this. We had a pretty gnarly call last night, or this morning, technically, I guess. And we had a student with us. And the student was at a different station than me. But I know that before we had left, I had mentioned it to the medic crew that was with her. Our battalion chief had mentioned it to that medic crew that was with her. So this is middle of the night or whatever, but you could tell like her eyes were huge. She just saw something that she'd only ever read about before. And so we gave her permission to go home. Whatever worked for her, take her out of service. I don't quite know all that happened. That was kind of not my purview, but I know that we were super conscious about it in the moment and moving forward. And likely, I'm sure there's going to be follow-up with the school that she goes to. And I'm sure we're going to throw some resources her way if the school or whoever says yes to it. So really thankful where we're at in the fire service, where that is kind of, it seems like, at least in my neck of the woods, that's kind of the new normal.
Yeah, I had a similar experience with the co-op students, so that definitely resonates. I can understand how that would be. Maybe the main message is when you're in the moment, yes, and you're doing your job, there's times when it's not the time.
Yeah.
But there will be a time when it's the time, and there should be a time when it's the time. And then when that happens, allow it to be. Allow yourself time to have that moment or moments. Just find them. I think if you just shut it down and then like, well, it was a week ago, the statute of limitations is beyond. So we just keep moving forward. It's like, well, no, I think you need to, however you need to, whenever that moment is, that it should be on our radar, that I better process that or I'm going to carry it. We're always going to carry it, but maybe you're going to carry it in the way that you don't need to.
You're familiar with Mark von Oppen?
Yeah.
God, I'm trying to see if I can't find this. Stand by. Sorry.
Yeah, dude, go for it.
Yes, Daddy's Girl.
Okay, I've read that. That's pretty old, right?
It is. It's from April 7th, 2012. Such a powerful, he's such a great writer. So good with his words. But that story in particular is something that every time you read that, and as I do more and more, and I've been on this job longer and longer, seems to be more and more pertinent to this job and to me. I feel like he wrote that for me sometimes. Yeah, I do remember that corner, that call.
Maybe this is a nice jump off point to soften this. I'll use your phrase as we get closer to landing this plane. I think that's the phrase you'll use. I like it.
I do. Way too often, probably. I got a couple of phrases that I use way too often. Let's pull that thread.
I love it. We all do. that this is the other benefit of these podcasts, of these blogs, of guys and girls taking the opportunity to verbalize something, even in a messy way, that you don't know if it's going to resonate with someone, and have that kind of, when you read that, you understand it, you feel seen, you feel that someone understands you. That's when you feel like you're not alone in what you think, because you're reading it from someone else. But someone has to take that risk or put themselves out there and put it into words, either verbally or written form. And you just don't know how that's going to impact people. So maybe just speak to your take on that too, like where we are in the fire service now. And we have touched on it a little bit, but the benefit of us all supporting each other's work and being voices at the table and trying to talk things out as best we can and trying to improve how we do things.
I think sometimes the hardest part about having difficulties, big bucket that's ill-defined, but with how you reacted to a situation or what you did in a situation or anything that we're going to deem kind of mental health. I think the hardest part for so many people is you think you're alone. You think you're the only one that's ever seen this, done this, thought this, fucked that up, whatever the case may be. And I think the more and more open we are about so many of these conversations, you start realizing, okay, this is not abnormal. I'm not the freak here. This is normal. And this has happened to hundreds and hundreds of people. And I think just the knowledge of that in itself is super valuable. And this is something I think the fire service has done so much good. And we've come so far in my short time. But probably the biggest return on investment I think that we've probably had up to this point, and again, almost impossible to quantify, is the fact that we are open and honest about a lot of these discussions. At least in a lot of circles, we're open and honest about a lot of these discussions, a lot of the difficulties, a lot of these difficulties that aren't so black and white. I didn't know what to do and I struggled, and understanding not only why this has happened, because I think that's super valuable as well, but understanding that this happens to so many people. This is part of the human condition. We do something that's very, very difficult at times. Much of our job is relatively chill, but every once in a while, it gets real fast. And we're human beings, and we're not necessarily trained to where we need to be for a lot of these things. And anytime that I think we can realize that, hey, mistakes are going to happen, and how we react to those mistakes is really, I think, where the value is at. There's a lot of value there. And I think that's what the fire service has done so good over the past, half a generation or generation, just normalizing having discussions about mental health. I don't think that was the norm when I first came onto the job. And go back a generation before that, it absolutely wasn't normal. And go back another generation before that, and it's like, you're sad about that? I was in World War II. And now we're having these competitions about who had it harder, which I don't think is valuable to anybody either. Everybody processes things differently. Everybody is different, but the human condition is pretty similar. Just knowing that you're not alone, knowing where to go for some of these resources if you are struggling is super valuable. The fact that we are starting to quantify how many people are harming themselves and committing suicide, as opposed to just kind of burying our head in the sand, I think is super valuable to the fire service. I'm not a mental health expert, but I'm excited for where we're at and where we seem to be trending and heading.
Let's end off on music. I see some great albums on the wall behind you. Are you a Bon Iver fan? Let's start there. They're from Eau Claire.
You did your research right there.
I'm a huge Bon Iver fan, so that's the only reason I know they're from where you're from.
Okay. A little bit. I don't know his music a ton. I've been trying to see him out and about. He owns a bunch of stuff around town, owns a hotel. He helps out with a music festival. My wife really likes him. And so I hear it typically from her. I don't dislike him at all. It's kind of right up my wheelhouse. But I fall back into all the bands that I kind of grew up on.
Give me your hit list. Give me your, if you were going to recommend music to people, or your kids are finally going to go, Dad, what is good music?
Yes. And this is where my kids and I don't see eye to eye, but I feel like this is my job as a dad, is to turn them on to some good music. So Beatles are my all-time favorite. My oldest kid's middle name is Lennon, big John Lennon fan. My younger kid, his first name is Dylan, after Bob Dylan. So I'm a hippie at heart. I grew up with kind of classic rock and folk music. And then I guess before that, I grew up like 50s and 60s. I listened to my mom's music. She was a big music fan growing up. So anytime we're in the car, we're listening to the oldies station, right? 50s, 60s. Then it was a lot of hippie music, a lot of classic rock as well throughout all this. And then hip hop too. Some underground hip hop. I love Eminem. I love Brother Ali. There's a handful of groups that I really, really like. Aretha Franklin's one of my favorite of all time. This is kind of like some of my hit lists up there. If you can't see who's all up there, we got the Beatles, we got Sublime, We got Allman Brothers, we got Weezer, Aretha Franklin, and Brother Ali. So that's kind of like some of my top sixes right there.
R.I.P. Ben Harper too, right?
Love Ben Harper. Yeah, good. Yeah, nice. That's what we're listening to right now.
Burn One Down, not necessarily good for the fire service, but it's an amazing song.
It's a great song, and it's when I was going to undergrad, I took one philosophy class, which was one of my favorite classes. And we talked about the harm principle, which he brings up in that song. My choice is what I choose to do. If I'm causing no harm, it shouldn't bother you. Your choice is who you choose to be. If you're causing no harm, you're all right with me. So we talked about that in my class. And I remember for this was the only class I think I took in college where we had these little blue books and you had to write all your answers kind of long form in this book. And then they read what you wrote. It wasn't multiple choice. It wasn't any other type of test. It was just blue book and start writing. So I quoted Ben Harper for one of my tests. And I did okay in that class too, if I remember correctly. Jack Johnson, Dave Matthews, so much good music here. Don't get me started here. Give me your faves.
Well, Bon Iver's up there.
Perfect.
Radiohead's the all-time.
Love Radiohead.
Beck.
Okay, yeah.
Big Beck fan. Everybody you've named. Weezer had a great YouTube video they did of it was a 30-year anniversary of the Blue Album.
I almost went to that show. I was so close to going to that. I called some
it's
buddies.
Amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, the Blue Album is so good, dude.
Yeah.
So good.
At least watch the YouTube video because it's phenomenal. Highly recommend that.
I will absolutely do that.
Yeah, and then I'm a big folk rock kind of guy too. There's, some bands maybe are more like local, but Donovan Woods, and there's Gregory Alan Isaacoff, Jason Isbell.
I'm not familiar with any of those.
Chris Stapleton.
Stapleton, yeah. Give me those other three that you just said.
Gregory Alan Isaacoff.
That's a mouthful. Isaacoff.
Donovan Woods. Probably really enjoy him.
Okay, perfect.
Real emotional, like rainy day or Sunday drive kind of music.
I can feel it, just soulful.
Yeah.
I like it.
If I'm going to drop some Canadiana on you, Tragically Hip.
I've heard of them before, but I can't.
Their entire discography is just crushing it. So you really have to dive into that.
Perfect. I thought you were going Anne Murray on me.
Gordon Lightfoot, right? Yeah.
Alanis Morissette.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. I do love some Alanis. She hit when I was in high school, just blew up. Her Jagged Little Pill album is sick.
Nice. Camp? CAAMP. Have you heard of them?
I've heard of them as well, but I can't tell you what they sing. The last concert I went to was Brother Ali. Pretty obscure. But we just got tickets like 2 nights ago to Greaves, another kind of white rapper, kind of Macklemore-esque.
Yeah.
So pretty stoked for that as well.
Right on. Tallest Man on Earth?
I don't know him either or them either.
We're going to have a whole hour where we just talk music and
Dude,
just
I
trade
love
bands.
There's a couple people that I talked to. Do you know Greg Redmond at all?
Yeah, I know the name.
So super intelligent dude. He's out of St. Louis Fire Department. There's a couple people that I really think are just interesting to talk to. So interesting to talk to. I talk to him a lot about music. He's got some pretty obscure tastes, at least obscure to me. So I like talking. He's turned me on to a couple people as well.
Joshua Hyslop, or Hyslop, Hyslop. I'll give you that one too.
Thank you.
You got to grab a binder of my music that I just sort of strum away at, and I'll flip through it. We should do that. We'll do a session where you and I just talk music and we trade bands. And
let's talk. I feel like we could talk books too. I don't know if you read it
and
all,
movies.
But
we could.
I feel like you do.
Yeah. Great one I'm reading right now is called "Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me." It's about how we justify bad decisions, and I can't remember the entire title, but. It's very research-based. It talks about how we just justify basically everything, and we have our narratives. The cognitive dissonance. Yeah. I think it's right up your alley.
It reminds me of this old quote. I think it's probably from the Bible, but Jonathan Haidt, Dr. Haidt talks about it. And I'm gonna murder this quote, but it's something along the lines of, "We are so easy to see the sliver in someone else's eye, but we can't see like a 2x4 in our own eye."
Yeah. I think it's a splinter in the log. I think it's that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yep.
Yeah. Or some other ancient terminology.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Splinter and log.
In your eye. Yeah. Awesome, dude. Well, this was great. I really appreciate you. I love your take on things.
Well, right back at you. I had a really good time talking to you, man. If there's any value in this and you want to put it out, awesome. If you listen to it and you're like, that was stupid, my feelings will not be hurt, my man.
Okay, man. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, you too, man. I had a good time. Have a beautiful weekend.